In the heart of the Galactic Academy, students from all across the universe sat in a massive hall, waiting for the day's announcements. The hall was enormous, with glowing holographic projections showing the faces of leaders from every corner of the galaxy. Among the many species seated were the Yularians with their tall, slender frames, the Varnoks with their thick, muscular builds, and the silent, shimmering Arcturians. The air was thick with the hum of advanced technology, and the students whispered, in excitement eager for the news. The headmaster Threxus, a towering Varnok with glowing red eyes, stood at the front. His reputation for being tough and unyielding was known across the galaxy. He stepped forward, raising one massive hand to silence the room. "Students of the Galactic Academy," Threxus boomed, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "I have a very important announcement to make. After careful deliberation, it has been decided that humanity will be banned from attending the Academy. There will be no more human students here." A hushed murmur spread through the crowd. A few Ilarians, who were known for their superior intellect, exchanged glances and smiled. The Varnoks shrugged, clearly unbothered. Most of the students had never even met a human, but all had heard stories of their primitive ways, their history of violence, and their lack of control over their emotions. To them, humans were like a wild animal, dangerous but easily controlled. Zorak, an ambitious young Ilarian student with bright green eyes and sharp features, leaned back in his seat and chuckled. "So they finally realized humans aren't fit for this place," he muttered, loud enough for a few others to hear. The students laughed, some even shaking their heads. Humans, in their view, were too emotional, too unpredictable. They weren't, like the advanced species at the Academy, who had perfected their control over their emotions and thoughts. Humans were still caught up in their wars, their survival instincts, and their chaotic nature. Ilara Ward, the only human present, stood quietly at the back of the hall. She had come to the Academy with hopes of opening doors for humanity to join the galactic community. But now, hearing the announcement, her stomach churned. She was the representative for Earth, a diplomat on a mission, and it seemed her mission had failed before it even started. Threxus continued. "The human race has proven to be too dangerous and uncontrollable to be part of our education system. They have been banned not just from this academy, but from all other galactic institutions. Their reckless behavior is too much of a threat." Ilara's eyes narrowed. She could feel the weight of their laughter, their judgment, pressing against her. But she wouldn't give up so easily. Her mission wasn't over yet. She knew this was just the beginning. Once Threxus finished his speech, the room erupted into casual chatter. To the aliens, it was just another decision in the never-ending political game of the galaxy. To Ilara, it was a challenge she would not let go unanswered. As the students began to file out of the hall, Zorak shot her a look. "You'll never make it in this galaxy, human," he whispered, his voice dripping with mockery. But Ilara stood tall, refusing to let his words shake her. She had a plan, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not these students, decide humanity's future. Ilara Ward stood still, her mind racing as the laughter of the alien students filled the air. She had never felt so small and yet so determined at the same time. The announcement was clear. Humanity was banned. The galaxy had decided that humans were not worthy of being part of the great Galactic Academy, but Ilara wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. After the ceremony ended, Ilara made her way to the headmaster's office, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls of the Academy. She had been sent here to prove that humans could be more than the chaotic, violent species others believed them to be. But the moment the ban was announced, she realized that the true test had only just begun. Inside the office, Threxus sat behind a large desk, his glowing eyes fixed on her as she entered. The Varnok headmaster looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Human," he said, his voice low and stern. "You've heard the decision. The ban is final. You have no place here." Ilara stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. She couldn't let him see how angry she felt. She needed a plan. She needed a way to show the galaxy that humans weren't to be underestimated. "I disagree," she said firmly. "I believe humans can prove their worth. If you allow us to compete, we will show you that we belong here." Threxus raised an eyebrow. "Compete? With who? Against whom?" Ilara took a deep breath. "I challenge you to allow humans to compete against your best students. Let us prove ourselves in a series of tests. If we lose, we will leave quietly. But if we win, humanity should be allowed to join the academy." The headmaster stared at her, silent for a moment. Ilara knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she couldn't back down. She had come too far. Finally, Threxus leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You are bold, human, but I will allow this. You will face the top students from different species, our best. If your kind is truly as great as you claim, perhaps we will reconsider." Ilara didn't waste a second. "Thank you," she said, nodding once before turning to leave the room. As she stepped outside, she felt a surge of hope. She had a chance, just one chance, to change everything. But it wouldn't be easy. The aliens had strengths that humans couldn't match in many areas, from speed to intelligence. Ilara needed to think differently. She needed to use what made humans unique: their creativity, their adaptability, and their resilience. Later that day, Ilara gathered a small group of humans who had come to the academy with her. They were diplomats, scientists, and engineers. People who didn't look like warriors or fighters, but Ilara knew their minds were sharp. They would be the ones to represent humanity. The team was nervous, but determined. Ilara explained the challenge to them. "We might not have the advanced technology or strength of the other species," she said, "but we have something they don't. We have the ability to think on our feet, to adapt, and to overcome any challenge." One of the scientists, Tom, raised his hand. "What if we fail? What if we're not strong enough?" Ilara smiled. "We will not fail. We have something far stronger than strength: our will. We will prove that humanity is not just a species to be laughed at." As she looked around at her team, Ilara saw the same determination in their eyes. They were ready. They would face the aliens in these tests, and they would fight with everything they had. The first test was just around the corner, and Ilara was ready to show the galaxy that humans were far more than they seemed. The first challenge was set. Ilara and her team stood in a massive arena on the alien planet Xantora, a world known for its deadly obstacle courses. The sky above them was a deep purple, with 2 moons casting a soft glow over the landscape. This planet was one of the toughest places in the galaxy to survive. It was filled with dangerous animals, harsh terrain, and unpredictable weather. The perfect place to test physical strength, agility, and endurance. Zorak and his team of alien students stood confidently on the opposite side of the arena, looking more than ready. They were tall, their bodies designed for speed and power. Zorak, in particular, had the advantage of enhanced reflexes and the ability to control the air around him. He could fly short distances and manipulate winds. The humans, on the other hand, looked small and out of place in comparison, their only weapons being their bodies and minds. Ilara looked at her team. They were not warriors. They were scientists, engineers, and diplomats. But each of them had something important to offer: cleverness, determination, and the ability to think on their feet. They would need all of that in this brutal competition. "Remember," Ilara said to them, "we might not have their strength, but we have the human spirit. We don't give up. Not ever." The race began with a loud horn. The alien students immediately dashed forward, their speed breathtaking. Zorak took off into the air with a burst of wind, soaring over the first obstacle, a giant wall of sharp, moving spikes. He moved with grace, his agility making it look easy. Ilara's team was slower, but they weren't far behind. Tom, a scientist with quick reflexes, leapt first, narrowly dodging a swing of sharp metal bars. His landing was rough, but he recovered, quickly, helping Maya, the engineer, who was struggling to climb the steep wall. Maya was small but incredibly clever. using her knowledge of physics to figure out how to reach the top with limited strength. With her quick thinking, she found a way to use the environment around them, finding small rocks to climb higher. Behind them, Jace, a diplomat with an athletic build, pushed forward with all his might, focusing on endurance. He wasn't the fastest, but he could handle the grueling obstacles, using his training to power through each one, never stopping. Meanwhile, Zorak and his team were already near the end. They had the advantage of technology, with some of them using laser tools to cut through walls and others moving so fast that they barely seemed to touch the ground. It was clear that the alien students had the edge when it came to pure physical ability. But Ilara's team wasn't ready to give up yet. They kept moving forward, pushing their limits. Then came the final challenge, a river of boiling water. The alien students moved with ease, flying or jumping across the dangerous river. Zorak made it look effortless, hovering over the water with a smug smile on his face. But Ilara's team had to think fast. Maya, using her knowledge of engineering, quickly found a way to build a raft out of nearby materials. It wasn't pretty, but it floated. The humans helped each other, using teamwork to carefully navigate across the boiling river. Their bodies sore, but their spirits high. It took longer, but they made it. Finally, as they approached the finish line, Ilara's team crossed just moments behind the alien students. Zorak and his team had won, but the humans weren't far behind. They had done something no one expected. They had survived. The crowd of aliens who had been watching from the sidelines gasped in disbelief. The humans weren't the fastest, but they had managed to overcome the harsh obstacles using their minds and determination. Zorak turned to Ilara, his expression no longer one of mockery. "You, humans, are not as weak as I thought," he said, his voice filled with grudging respect. Ilara smiled, her team exhausted but proud. This was just the beginning. They had made it through the first test. Now, they had to prepare for the next one. The second challenge took place in a massive simulation room, a high-tech environment where starships could be controlled from within a holographic battlefield. The room was filled with a glowing blue light, and floating screens showed the star systems where the battles would take place. A large central display showed the countdown, ticking away the moments before the test began. Ilara's team stood, together, eyes focused, each one feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. They had just survived the physical trial, but this one would be different. This time, it wasn't about strength or endurance. It was about strategy. They were about to face the best tactical minds from across the galaxy, including Zorak and his team. The Ilarian students were known for their advanced knowledge of warfare and their ability to read any battlefield. They had mastered military strategy from a young age. Zorak, in particular, had a reputation for being a brilliant tactician. He was confident that his team would win again, no matter the odds. As the countdown reached 0, the simulation room flashed to life, and suddenly, Ilara and her team were standing in the middle of a battle. The holograms of vast space fleets, made up of ships from different galactic factions, appeared around them. The rules of the game were simple. Whoever could destroy the opposing fleet first would win. Each team had a fleet of ships, and they had to command them wisely. Zorak and his team wasted no time. With their superior knowledge of tactics, they immediately began moving their ships into position, surrounding the human fleet with precision. Zorak's ships were sleek and fast, equipped with powerful weapons that could tear through any defense. His team worked in perfect sync, anticipating every move and countering each of the humans' actions. Ilara's team, however, had only basic ships, old models that lacked the speed and firepower of their alien counterparts. But they had something that the aliens didn't, the ability to think outside the box. Ilara quickly took control of the human fleet, ordering her team to stay calm and work together. "Listen up," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "We may not have the firepower, but we have something better. We have the ability to adapt. Let's confuse them. Use the environment. Set traps." Tom, who had some experience with old spacecraft technology, quickly got to work, using their limited resources to create decoy ships. He set them to fly in random directions, making it look like the human fleet was scattered and disorganized. Zoric's team fell for the trick and launched their ships to attack the decoys, leaving their main fleet vulnerable. At the same time, Jace, who had been studying military history, suggested a risky but clever plan. "We're going to strike them where they least expect it," he said. "Let's move our ships into the asteroid belt. They'll never see us coming." The humans moved their fleet into the asteroid field, using the terrain to hide their ships from the alien sensors. The Ilarian fleet, unable to track them, began to spread out, searching for any sign of movement. But Ilara's team was patient. They waited for the perfect moment. Then, when Zoric's ships had scattered too far, Ilara gave the order to strike. The human fleet emerged from the shadows, launching a surprise attack on Zoric's ships. Using their remaining firepower, they disabled several of his vessels, catching the Ilarians off guard. The battle raged on, but the humans had gained the upper hand. Zoric's team, while skilled, could not recover from the surprise attack. In the end, the human fleet emerged victorious, having used their intelligence and creativity to overcome their disadvantage. When the simulation ended, the holograms faded, and the room returned to normal. Zorik stood still for a moment, clearly shocked. His face had lost its usual confidence. You won," he said, almost in disbelief. Ilara nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It wasn't about the best ships or the best weapons. It was about using our brains. Humans think differently, Zorik. We don't always do things the way you expect." The alien students, who had watched from the sidelines, were silent. They had expected another easy victory, but the humans had proven that they could outthink even the most advanced tactical minds in the galaxy. Zorik finally gave a small, respectful nod. "I was wrong," he admitted. "You humans are unpredictable." Ilara's team had done it again. They had won another challenge, and this time they had done it by outsmarting their opponents. The humans weren't just surviving. They were proving their worth. The third and final test was unlike anything Ilara and her team had faced so far. It wasn't about strength, speed, or tactics. It was a test of the mind. The Galactic Academy had a special chamber called the Mental Gauntlet, designed to challenge the intellect and willpower of even the smartest beings in the galaxy. The room was dimly lit, with walls lined with floating screens that projected complex puzzles, riddles, and mental challenges. The air buzzed with a soft hum, as if the room itself was alive, adjusting to the minds of the participants. Each alien species had its own unique way of thinking, but the humans had never faced anything like this. The Wheelarians, with their superior intellect, had always been able to solve problems faster than anyone else. The pressure was on. Zorik and his team were already inside, standing tall and ready. Their faces showed no signs of worry. They were confident that they would win this test as easily as the others. But Ilara's team wasn't going to give up. They had faced worse odds before and come out on top. This time it would be no different. The challenge began with a series of riddles that appeared on the screens. Each question was more difficult than the last, and the clock was ticking. Ilara's heart raced as she watched the first riddle appear. It was a strange combination of numbers and symbols, something that seemed almost impossible to understand. The answer is the number of stars in the first constellation you see when you look at the third moon. The riddle read. Zorak's team immediately began discussing it, their quick minds already piecing together the answer. They were fast, but Ilara had learned to trust her instincts. She glanced at the riddle again, trying to find the hidden clue. She had learned something important in the academy. Never rush. Taking a moment to think could make all the difference. Ilara, "Wait," Maya said, her voice calm. "Look at the constellation. It's not about the number of stars, it's about the position of the stars. The riddle is asking about the shape." Ilara smiled. Maya was right. The stars weren't just numbers. They formed a pattern. The answer wasn't a number. It was a shape. Ilara quickly entered the correct answer. A triangle. The screen flashed green, signaling that they had answered correctly. But there was no time to celebrate. The next puzzle appeared, this time much more complicated. The screens showed a series of abstract shapes that seemed to be constantly shifting, forming new patterns every second. Elara's team had to figure out what pattern was hidden in the chaos. "I can't focus with all these shapes," Jace said, his eyes scanning the screen. Elara nodded. "We don't need to focus on all of them. We need to find the one that's out of place. There's always one shape that doesn't fit." The others nodded and began looking more closely. After a few tense moments, Tom finally spotted it. "There, the square. It doesn't belong with the rest." Elara quickly pressed the button for the square, and the screen flashed green again. The puzzles kept coming, each one more difficult than the last, but Elara and her team were in sync. They worked together, combining their knowledge and skills, to solve the challenges. There were moments when the pressure almost overwhelmed them, but they always found a way to push through. They didn't have the quickness or the mental enhancements of the Relarians, but they had something else: their ability to think outside the box and approach problems from different angles. As the final challenge approached, Elara's team had solved nearly all the puzzles. They were ahead by just a few points, but Zorak and his team weren't far behind. The last test would be the most difficult of all. They had to solve a complex equation that could only be completed by the fastest and most brilliant minds. Zorak's team went straight to work, their fingers flying across the floating screens, but Elara took a deep breath. She wasn't going to rush. She thought about everything they had learned, every challenge they had faced. This equation wasn't just about numbers, it was about understanding the problem. "Elara," Maya said quietly, "I think the equation is asking us to look at it in two parts, not one. It's broken up into two separate problems." Elara's eyes widened. She had seen it now. The equation wasn't one big puzzle. It was two smaller puzzles that could be solved independently. Working together, they quickly completed both parts of the equation. With a final press of the button, the screen flashed green. The room went silent. Zorak and his team were still working, but Elara's team had completed the test. Zorak slowly turned toward her, his face full of respect. Humans are incredible," he admitted. "I thought we had this, but you outsmarted us again." Elara smiled. They had done it. They had faced the hardest test of all and won. After days of intense trials, the final challenge arrived. Elara and her team had passed every test, from physical endurance to tactical mastery and mental agility. They had proven that humans were not to be underestimated. Now, only one thing stood between them and victory: the ultimate test, a challenge designed to push every participant to their absolute limits. The test would take place on the Crimson Plateau, a vast barren landscape known for its harsh conditions. The rules were simple but brutal. Each team had to retrieve an ancient artifact hidden deep within a dangerous maze. The maze was filled with traps, puzzles, and wild creatures, all designed to test the strength, speed, and intellect of the participants. Only the first team to retrieve the artifact and return to the starting point would win. Elara's heart raced as she and her team stood at the edge of the plateau. The sky above them was dark, filled with swirling clouds. The air was thin, and the temperature had dropped sharply. This was going to be the hardest challenge yet, and the human team was already at a disadvantage. They had no special abilities, no advanced technology to guide them through the maze. All they had was their resourcefulness and each other. Zorak's team, on the other hand, was well prepared. They had advanced tracking technology, enhanced strength and speed. Elara could see the confidence in their eyes as they took their positions ready to race toward the maze entrance. But Elara wasn't afraid. She knew her team could do this. "Remember," she said to her teammates, "this is about more than just speed. We have to think smart. Keep your heads cool, and don't rush. We can do this together." With that, the horn blew, signaling the start of the challenge. Both teams sprinted toward the maze, the ground beneath their feet rocky and uneven. Zorak's team moved with incredible speed, their footsteps light and quick, while Elara's team followed at a steady pace, using their surroundings to guide them. As they reached the maze, the entrance loomed large in front of them. The walls of the maze were made of a strange metallic substance that shimmered in the dim light. They were tall, at least 30 feet high, and looked impossible to climb. The maze itself seemed to stretch on forever, with twisting pathways that led in all directions. Zorek's team charged ahead, scanning the paths with their advanced equipment. They quickly made a choice, darting down the left corridor. Alara watched them go, then turned to her team. "We'll take the right path. Stay close." The maze was as dangerous as it looked. Almost immediately, Alara's team encountered their first obstacle. A large pit filled with spikes. There was no way around it. "We need to jump across," Tom said, eyeing the gap. "But it's too wide for a normal jump." Alara thought for a moment. "We'll have to build something. Look around for materials." They found large pieces of metal and rocks nearby. Working quickly, Maya and Jace used their engineering skills to create a makeshift bridge. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. One by one, the team crossed the gap, barely avoiding the sharp spikes below. Meanwhile, Zorek's team was already far ahead, having used their superior technology to bypass similar obstacles. Alara's team couldn't afford to waste time. They pushed forward, facing new challenges every step of the way. At one point, they encountered a set of glowing walls that seemed to pulse with energy. "These walls are electric," Maya said, analyzing them. "If we touch them, we'll be shocked." Alara quickly surveyed the surroundings. "There's a gap in the middle of the walls. If we can time it right, we can slip through." The team waited, counting the pulses. When the walls shifted apart for just a moment, they rushed through, narrowly escaping the electric shock. Time was running out. Zorek's team had already reached the artifact. Alara could see them in the distance, standing before a golden pedestal. But they were still far from the exit. The path was long, and the maze was designed to confuse and mislead. Alara's team pressed on, despite the exhaustion that weighed them down. They had one final obstacle to face, a huge stone door blocking their way. The artifact was just on the other side. "We need to move it," Jace said, eyeing the heavy stone. "It's too big to lift." Alara's mind raced. Then it hit her. "We don't need to lift it. We need to open it. Use the pressure points." Maya examined the door carefully and quickly identified the pressure plates hidden along the edges. With a series of quick movements, she triggered the plates, and the door slowly creaked open. The artifact was just ahead. Zorek's team was still struggling with the final leg of their journey. Alara's team moved fast now, using the last of their strength. They grabbed the artifact, a shining crystal, and began making their way back to the entrance. They weren't first, but they weren't far behind. Zorek's team was almost at the finish line, but Alara's team pushed through, determined to make it. They crossed. Alara's team stood together, catching their breath after the intense race through the maze. The last few minutes had been the most exhausting of their lives, but they had done it. They had completed the final test. The artifact, a glowing crystal, was in their hands. The crowd of alien students who had watched the challenge unfold from the stands were now murmuring among themselves, shocked by the humans' unexpected victory. Zorek's team had been ahead for most of the test, and yet, here they were, standing side by side with the humans, no longer with the smug expressions they had started with. Zorek, who had always been confident and proud of his team, now looked at Alara with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You did it," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't think you would. You humans are surprising." Alara smiled, but there was no time to gloat. The crowd was growing louder, their voices filled with excitement. They had just witnessed something incredible. The humans had taken on every challenge, against all odds, and had come out victorious. It wasn't just a victory in the competition, it was a statement. Humans weren't to be underestimated. "We just used our brains," Jace said with a grin. "It's what we do best." The tension between the two teams had shifted. What had started as a rivalry was slowly transforming into something else. There was an unspoken understanding between Alara's team and Zorek's. The human team had earned their place in this galaxy-wide competition, and the aliens knew it. But the celebration didn't last long. The grand judge, an enormous creature that appeared to be made of living crystal, stepped forward. It had been silently observing the trials, its glowing eyes never leaving the competitors. The crowd quieted as the creature raised one massive hand. Congratulations to the winners, the judge's voice boomed, echoing through the arena. You have proven yourselves worthy. But remember, the tests were only the beginning. There is a greater purpose behind these challenges. You must now face the true reason for your presence here. Alara's heart skipped a beat. What did the judge mean by that? What was the greater purpose? Zorak's team, still standing nearby, looked just as confused as Alara's team. They had all come here thinking the competition was about showing strength, intelligence, and teamwork. But now, it seemed there was something much bigger at play. The judge continued, "The galaxy is on the brink of a great war. Your skills, your abilities, and your unity will be tested once more. The challenges you faced here were only a preview. You will now be sent to the front lines of a conflict that threatens the very existence of this galaxy." Alara's mind raced. A war? She had come here to prove humans were capable, to show that they had something valuable to offer. But a war? This was far more than she had ever imagined. The judge paused, allowing the weight of its words to sink in. You have all proven yourselves. Now you must prepare for what is to come. Your actions will determine the future of your species. Zorak finally spoke, his voice serious. What do you mean by prepare? What is this conflict? The Kibona judge's glowing eyes seemed to flicker as if considering how much to reveal. You will know soon enough. The war has already begun. With those final words, the judge raised its hand once again, and the arena began to shift. The ground beneath Alara and her team trembled. The world around them seemed to blur, and before they could fully comprehend what was happening, the scene changed. They found themselves standing on a new, unfamiliar world. The sky was filled with strange, dark clouds, and the air smelled of ozone and burning metal. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the air. Where are we? Tom asked, his voice filled with awe and concern. This is no longer a test, Zorak said, his usual confidence replaced with wariness. We are in the heart of the conflict. Alara looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. They had just entered a war zone, a real war zone. The calm and controlled environment they had been in was gone. Now everything was chaos. Zorak's team stepped forward, their faces set in determination. Alara knew one thing. The journey was far from over. The galaxy was on the edge of a war, and she and her team were about to be pulled into it. The scene before them was unlike anything Alara and her team had ever seen. They stood on a barren world, surrounded by the echoes of battle. The sky above them was dark, filled with swirling black clouds. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of explosions. It was a war zone. The war the Grand Judge had spoken of had already begun. Alara turned to her team, her heart racing. The weight of the situation was sinking in. They were no longer just participants in a competition. They were soldiers in a war. We need to stay together, Alara said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. This is real now. Stay focused, keep calm, and listen to each other. Her team nodded, their faces showing a mix of fear and determination. Zorak and his team, standing nearby, were also taking in the scene. They had been trained for combat, but this was different. It wasn't a game anymore. The Grand Judge's voice boomed once again. You have been brought here for a reason. The galaxy is under threat. The enemy is vast and powerful. The war will test everything you have learned. You will fight not just for your survival, but for the survival of all your species. Alara's mind raced. What kind of enemy were they facing? What had they gotten themselves into? Before she could think any further, the ground shook violently, sending a wave of dust into the air. A massive ship, dark and menacing, flew overhead, casting a shadow across the battlefield. The sound of engines roared like thunder. The enemy forces were closing in. We don't have time to question it now, Zorak said, his voice firm. We need to act. Alara looked around and saw that the landscape was filled with ruins. Buildings that had been destroyed, craters from bombs, and vehicles scattered about. The battlefield was a chaotic mess. There was no clear direction, no way of knowing where to go. We need to find shelter, Maya suggested. We need a plan. Tom, who had a knack for finding things in the chaos, pointed toward a ruined building in the distance. There, we can take cover there. It looks safe. Without hesitation, the team moved toward the structure, ducking behind debris to avoid being seen. As they ran, Ilara noticed something. There were no civilian survivors, no sign of anyone else. It was just soldiers, and everything was destroyed. The war had already torn through this place, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. They reached the building and quickly entered. Inside, the walls were cracked and debris littered the floor. The air was stale and smelled like burnt metal. But it was safe, for now. Ilara turned to Zorak. What exactly are we fighting against? Zorak's expression hardened. The Erefians. They are a ruthless race known for their brutal tactics and advanced technology. They want to conquer this galaxy, and they'll stop at nothing to do it. The name sent a chill down Ilara's spine. The Erefians were a legend, a dark shadow that had been spoken about in hushed voices. No one had ever believed they were real. And now, here they were, facing them in the flesh. We need to strike back, Jace said, determination in his eyes. We can't just hide. We need to fight. Maya nodded. We've trained for this. We can't let fear control us. Ilara looked around at her team. They were ready, but they were still new to this world. They had only just been thrown into this war, and the enemy was far stronger than anything they had faced in the tests. But they had something the Erefians didn't. Unity. They had each other. And together, they could do anything. We need to find out where they're coming from, Ilara said. If we know their strategy, we can stop them. Zorak's eyes gleamed. I have a contact in the nearby city. They might have information. We can meet them there. Ilara nodded. Let's move out. The sooner we get the information, the sooner we can strike. The team gathered their gear and prepared to leave the shelter. The world outside was dangerous, but they had no choice. They had to take the fight to the Erefians before it was too late. As they stepped back out into the chaos, Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. The war had begun and there was no turning back now. But one thing was certain, they weren't going down without a fight. Ilara's team stepped cautiously out of the ruined building, their senses heightened. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and burning metal, and the distant rumble of explosions reminded them that they weren't alone. The Erefians were everywhere, their forces overwhelming and merciless. We need to move fast, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. If Zorak's contact has the information we need to get to them before the Erefians. Zorak nodded. His usual confidence was tempered by the situation. The enemy was relentless and the human team wasn't prepared for what they were about to face. But they had no choice. The stakes were too high. The team moved quickly through the destroyed streets, keeping to the shadows. Their boots crunched on debris as they navigated the wreckage of the city. Every corner could hide an enemy patrol, and every building could be a trap. But they were determined to press forward. After what felt like hours of tense silence, they reached a small, hidden building on the outskirts of the city. Zorak approached the door, signaling for the team to stop. He knocked in a pattern, and after a moment, the door creaked open. Inside, an alien figure appeared. A Wheelarian, the same species as Zorak. The Wheelarians were known for their intelligence and tactical prowess, and Ilara knew this contact was someone who could help them. We don't have much time, the Ilarian said, his voice low and urgent. The Erefians are closing in. They've already taken most of the outer cities. You need to move quickly if you want to stop them. Zorak nodded. What do we need to know? The Ilarian stepped aside, allowing them into the room. I've managed to intercept some of their communications. The Erefians are planning an all-out attack on the remaining human colonies. They know you're here and they want to eliminate the threat before you can do anything about it. Ilara's heart sank. The Erefians weren't just trying to conquer. They were trying to wipe them out. How much time do we have? The Ilarian's expression was grim. Less than a day. They're sending their forces to a central command station. If you can destroy it, you might be able to cripple their operations, but it won't be easy. The station is heavily guarded. Zorak turned to Ilara. We can do this. We have to do this. Ilara nodded. There was no other option. They had to act now. Where's the station? The Ilarian handed Zorak a small device. I've marked the location. But be careful. The Erethians have set traps all around the area, and they're waiting for you. Ilara's team gathered their weapons and supplies ready to face the battle ahead. They had faced tests before, but this was different. This was real. The lives of countless people depended on their success. We move out now, Ilara said, her voice filled with determination. We can't waste any more time. The team set out again, moving swiftly through the ruined city. They knew the danger they faced, but there was no turning back now. They had to stop the Erethians before it was too late. As they approached the location of the command station, Ilara's pulse quickened. The area was heavily guarded, just as the Willarian had said. The enemy was everywhere, their cold, mechanical eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no room for error. Zorak led the way, using his knowledge of military tactics to guide them through the terrain. The team moved in silence, taking out enemy patrols one by one. They worked as a unit, each person covering the others, blind spots. They reached the entrance of the command station, a large, imposing structure surrounded by a high-security fence. The air was thick with tension. Ilara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was it, their chance to stop the Erethians. Ready? Zorak whispered. Ilara nodded. Let's do it. The team charged forward, their weapons raised. A fierce firefight erupted as they breached the entrance, blasting their way through the guards. Ilara's heart raced as she fired, each shot echoing in her ears. The Erethians fought back with ruthless precision, but Ilara's team was faster, more agile. They pushed through the facility, each room more dangerous than the last. Explosions rang out as the team planted charges to destroy key parts of the station. The sound of gunfire and shouting filled the air, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. Finally, they reached the central control room. The Erethian commander stood there waiting for them, his eyes cold and calculating. You think you can stop us? He sneered. Ilara stepped forward, her voice steady. Yes, we can. With one final push, they overwhelmed the commander's forces and activated the explosives. The station trembled as the charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the building. The mission was a success, but the war was far from over.